Molweni, thank you for being here this early morning, especially after a wonderful evening that we had and the evening that went on and on forever. So you are the troopers that made it on time here. I expect that other people will join us as we proceed or so. So we are going to go into our program so that we run everything on time. So today, the session that we are doing here is the session on this plenary 5, Justice in Science, how to ensure science reflects the society we want. With that, I just looked into sort of the chronology of where concepts come from, and I want to share that with you. So justice as a concept has been a topic of interest for researchers and great thinkers. That includes people like Plato in 427 to 347 BC. It included people like Thomas Aquinas, who was influenced by Aristotle, who believed that justice was a form of natural duty owed by one person to another. And that's how they interpreted what justice is. Overall, there's a lot of evidence that justice is a concept that scholars have been grappling with. The last one I want to mention here is Immanuel Kant in 1724, who lived 1724 to 1804, where his theory of social justice is based on the concept of selflessness and moral duty. So they were interpreting what social justice means or so. First, starting with just looking at justice, not putting two concepts together, social justice, just justice. And it is my understanding that the social component of it as a concept was added to the concept of justice later on, and it was first used by a Sicilian priest, Luigi Tapparelli da Zeglio, in 1840. And pardon me if I haven't pronounced the name right. So that's when the two concepts came together. So the essence of the meaning and expectation when these two concepts were put together was that society should treat all equally well. So the question in this session this morning is whether our science serves and treats all equally well. How do we ensure that science reflects the society we want? The concept we have seen recently is used broadly and loosely sometimes in mission statements, job announcements, calls for proposals, and so on. Therefore, we need to engage it in our deliberations to make sure that what we do, with good intentions, of course, contributes to a just society. We are going to have a keynote address delivered by Dr. Alondra Nelson. We are fortunate that we have a person of her caliber coming to sort of give the keynote address for this session. Who is Dr. Alondra Nelson? She is Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy Director for Science and Society at the White House for Office of Science and Technology Policy under President Biden's administration. She has taken that position, being on leave from her regular position as the Harold F. Linder Chair and Professor at the Institute for Advanced Study, which is an independent research center in Princeton, New Jersey. Dr. Nelson is also a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the American Philosophical Society, the National Academy of Medicine, and the Council on Foreign Relations. So please, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Dr. Nelson to the podium.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mojo, for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. Honorable ministers, distinguished colleagues, fellow delegates, dear friends, I am humbled and grateful to be with you here today to represent the United States of America. On behalf of President Joe Biden, who believes that science and technology can be transformative for society, that it can be a lever for economic opportunity, for competitiveness and collaboration, and for expanding the horizons of people in our country and across the world. I'm honored to be here with you as a representative of an administration that has, since its first days and first actions, placed at the center of its work the values that have animated our discussions over the last several days. Equity and justice, opportunity and shared prosperity. The conviction that science and technology must be a tool to make lives better, safer, and fairer, and that innovation can open the door for a better future for all people. As I address you this morning, I am conscious that my presence here in the long arc of history is unlikely. And I am cognizant that a person who looks like me, a Black woman of African descent, the daughter of a father who was born and raised in the Jim Crow South in the United States, and of a mother reared under conditions of racial segregation, now here stands before you as an emissary of the United States of America and the President of the United States. If we bear in mind that equal past, if we recall the distance that all of us have traveled, then our focus here today, this week, on social justice will not strike us as merely a thematic choice for a conference. It will strike us, I believe, as our inheritance. It is the debt owed to those who came before us and the responsibility due to those who will come after. I'm grateful to call you and your countries, your organizations, and your institutions partners in this shared work of ensuring that science and technology meet the demands of history and serve as instruments for a better world. I've been encouraged to see these values on full display this week at the World Science Forum. As I've engaged with you, my fellow delegates, leaders in science, technology, research, innovation, and policy, and colleagues from across the globe. But I've borne witness to these ideals in full force in my travels this week across Cape Town and the Western Cape, and in my conversations with this country's extraordinary people. I have experienced South Africa's great warmth and hospitality, but even more, I've had the pleasure of meeting South Africans who are living these values we share. South Africans who are forging innovative answers to difficult problems, who are placing equity and justice at the center of their work, elevating the perspectives and needs of their own communities, and in so doing, moving our global scientific enterprise forward. I've met scientists who are building the largest radio telescope in the world to power the next generation of space discovery, and doing so in partnership with local communities and drawing on indigenous knowledge. I have met young strivers who are grabbing hold of the tools of the digital world to seize economic empowerment. I've met innovators who are creating the economy of the future, harnessing biological systems to create goods and services for agriculture, for health, manufacturing, energy, and more. I have met dedicated teachers who are mentoring their students, equipping them with the full range of STEM skills and helping them plan lives of discovery and growth. And I have met their students, their extraordinary students, their brilliant students. Young women and men in Khayelitsha and in Table View who are learning to code and to program, training in robotics, developing their talents in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. As a teacher myself, a longtime university professor in the United States, as Dr. Mojo said, these experiences with South African students have moved me deeply. They have reminded me of the stories and voices of so many in my own country, and they have inspired me. Because these students are not waiting for some far-off future to seize these opportunities and to begin acting as leaders. Instead, they are like so many young people across the world, leading right now, with great urgency and great optimism, creating answers to the challenges they see in their neighborhoods and their communities. It should not be taken for granted that here in South Africa and across the world, it is communities that are serving as the engine for creative and innovative solutions. Because too often in our history and our present, science and technology policy exist adjacent to communities rather than being informed by them. This disconnect lies at the heart of many of the challenges we face today as a global community. We see it in the unprecedented access we now have to data. Data that represents ourselves, that represents our communities, data that tells our stories in bright and vivid colors, data that can be marshaled to make life easier and more just. These data are mobilized in powerful technologies, from artificial intelligence to genomics, tools that can help us answer important questions about who we are and where we come from, tools that can help solve critical problems in the environment and agriculture and healthcare and well beyond. But too often these tools are developed without regard for their real-world consequences. Unchecked and unregulated, without the input of the people who will have to live with their results, and without their consent. We have the tools to cure disease, to prevent human suffering, but too often those tools are out of reach or accessible only to a privileged few. These inequities are unfolding in the lives of the most vulnerable among us, in my country and in yours. And each one falls squarely to us to solve. You see, when we have the ability to alleviate suffering but don't, that's not a failure of science, it's a failure of imagination. And when we can break the bonds of oppression but choose not to, that's not a failure of engineering, it's a failure of conscience. That is the beauty and the burden of this moment. And what we do now, how we resolve these tensions, is a referendum on us, a question of who we are and who we want to be. Minister Nzimande asked some of us earlier this week to reflect on the question, what do we and what do our nations make of the phrase science for social justice, the theme that brings us here? Over the last few days at the World Science Forum, I've been thinking about that question, pondering how I might answer it. And let me begin. To the Biden-Harris administration, there is simply no science without equity. Equitable outcomes are a marker of true innovation, of true ingenuity in science and technology. This is the core of our science and technology vision for the US government. Under President Biden's leadership, we are driving a science policy that sees solutions through the eyes of the vulnerable. We're executing on a science and technology policy that anchors and advances economic opportunity. We're fighting to get technological development right, to bring that development process into the public square, and to situate it in our values of equity, accountability, scientific integrity, and indeed, justice. These are not merely words, we are backing them up with action. Indeed, equity in everything we do is the official mandate of the government of the United States. Indeed, it is what brings me here this week. Within hours of taking office, President Biden signed an executive order directing every part of our government and every public servant to root out racism, discrimination, and inequity in federal programs and institutions. This was the President's very first directive, and what it meant for my team and those working on science and technology policy across the US government was that equity was our first mandate, our guiding mandate for the work that we would do. So let me take a moment to talk about some of that work. Delivering on the President's directive to embed equity in all of our work begins upstream. It starts with engaging directly with communities. Every day, across the Biden-Harris administration, we solicit information from communities who've long been an afterthought in policymaking. That is, before we issue a new policy or advance an initiative that will have an impact on people, we go to the people who will be most impacted by it. We listen, we learn, and then we seek to act on what we've heard. Take, for example, the administration's deep engagement with Indigenous communities. In 2021, the White House issued a memorandum committing the federal government to consulting meaningfully with tribal entities and Indigenous peoples in an effort to prioritize Indigenous knowledge in the way we make decisions in government. What came of that engagement was a clear request from tribal leaders for federal guidance on recognizing Indigenous knowledge. In short, these leaders made a powerful argument that Indigenous knowledge could make life better for everyone, and so that's what we did. Many government agencies in the US are already doing exemplary work in this area. Some have already taken important steps to recognize and elevate Indigenous knowledge in their work. So to build on these efforts and formalize the voice and wisdom of this long marginalized community in our policymaking, we developed official government guidance to elevate Indigenous knowledge and government research and decision-making. And I'm proud to say that we released that guidance earlier this month, and it will now be used across the US government to elevate Indigenous knowledge. This initiative is a cornerstone in the Biden-Harris administration's broader work to achieve equitable, inclusive public engagement in research and policymaking. When multiple parties, and not just monolithic institutions, have a say in the process of scientific research, discovery, and innovation, when communities have a voice throughout that process, and everything from the questions that are asked, to the study that is designed, to the data that is collected, to the findings that are interpreted, to the new information disseminated. When researchers choose a path of joint inquiry, when communities and scientists participate as equals, not just in terms of who is doing the work, but also who makes the decisions, who sets the priorities, who has the authority. That co-production, that co-creation can be a powerful force multiplier, shedding light on knowledge and solutions we might not have known otherwise. I believe that the work of partnering with communities to co-produce science and technology has rarely been more important, and that we need community-centered and community-led research and innovation. This is the kind of deep engagement, real organic engagement, we must lead if we are to build a science and technology policy that works for all people. Too often, well-intentioned innovation has been detached from the realities of how it will affect real people. At the White House, we're actively working to change that paradigm. Those of us speaking this morning have been given the assignment to imagine how to ensure science reflects the society we want. So imagine with me for a moment what it would look like. Imagine the outcomes we could achieve and the disasters we could avert if governments and companies and researchers and others thought about equity at the start of a design process, not only after challenges emerge downstream. Imagine what it would look like, what kind of society we could have if all innovation began with ethical forethought. Imagine what kind of society we could have if we always considered from the very beginning what might happen if new technology fell into the wrong hands, or how a scientific breakthrough might be misused in the global marketplace to deepen inequality. These are critical questions we asked at the White House when we set out to write the Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, a roadmap for a society where technological innovation happens without predation. A society where protections are baked in from the start, where marginalized communities are included in the initial development and design, and not just an afterthought following deployment. Much more than a set of principles, the Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights is a blueprint to empower people to expect better and demand better from their technologies. We put out the Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights because in our country and in societies around the world, artificial intelligence and other automated systems are increasingly shaping almost every part of our lives. The way we work, the way we learn, how we access healthcare, how we find a good job. Data-driven tools do tremendous good, as I've said already. They can empower us and help us solve our greatest challenges. But too often, the use of these technologies results in just the opposite, the deepening of inequality and the undermining of our rights. Too often, they are used to limit access to fundamental opportunities around the world. Driven by our commitment to engage deeply and substantively with communities, even around some of the most complex issues facing us today, the White House embarked on a year of public discussion and stakeholder engagement with people from all walks of life. We heard about the ways that artificial intelligence and automated systems are making life easier for people across the world, helping doctors identify disease early, helping farmers grow food more efficiently, helping small business owners save money and serve their communities. But we've also heard, time and time again, about people falling victim to discrimination at the hands of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Women who've been automatically sorted out of STEM applicant job pools with no way to seek recourse. Students erroneously accused of cheating by AI-enabled video surveillance. Entrepreneurs and engineers around the world who recognize these problems but don't have all the tools to root them out. The Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights is a call to make these 5 core protections a reality. First, the systems you use should work, and they should be safe and effective. Second, you should be protected from algorithmic discrimination, and automated systems should be used and designed in an equitable way. Third, you should be protected from abusive data practices via built-in protections, and you should have agency over how data about you is used. Fourth, you should know when an automated system is being used and understand how and why it contributes to outcomes that impact you. And fifth, you should be able to opt out and have access to a human being who can help you quickly solve a problem. The Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights can be used by anyone who interacts daily with these powerful technologies, and every person whose life could be altered by an unaccountable algorithm. But it is also for those of us who are shaping these technologies, those who design them, who build them, and in so doing, make decisions that will have serious consequences down the line in the lives of our communities. Many building these technologies, from businesses to engineers, want to do the right thing, but some have demonstrated a willful ignorance about the harms of the tools they deploy. Policymakers want to do the right thing too, but need support and partnership to help shape laws and regulations to protect their constituents. We want the AI Bill of Rights to help. So for each of the 5 core protections I've mentioned, we've developed a detailed technical companion with examples, concrete steps to build these protections from the beginning upstream into the technical design process. We offer technical guidance and we provide real-life, proven examples, policies, and practices to drive new actions, developed in collaboration with leading think tanks, technologists, and advocates. And we've also taken new actions as a government to bring these principles into practice. All of us have a role to play to bring scientific and technological development into the public square, to make sure that innovation is rooted in equity, integrity, and our common humanity. So we have brought copies of the AI Bill of Rights here with us this morning, and there's some, I think, in the back of the room there. I hope that you will take a look at one, that you will engage with it, that you will bring it home with you. We consider it to be a resource for all of us and for all of our communities, and we hope you will find it helpful. So the approach I've laid out, thinking systematically about the downstream consequences of new science, new technologies, is an approach we've been taking across a broad range of emerging policy challenges in science and technology. Let me briefly mention another example. The President asked his science and technology advisors to begin to think about the emerging societal and policy issues associated with cryptocurrencies and digital assets. The White House has put equity in front and center of mitigating the risks, potential risks from digital assets. This includes ensuring that we don't increase environmental harms for underserved communities as we build out this sector. And we are also supporting advances at the technological frontier that prioritize innovation for equity. For example, we're creating a national digital assets research and development agenda that will support cutting-edge examination of new technology that can help us ensure that all people can benefit from the digital economy. We believe this is a critical model for how all of us can take steps to shift the policymaking paradigm and proactively address the challenges of innovation before it's too late. This is one paradigm for how we can ensure that science reflects the world we want, but we must go one step further. We need to make sure that the benefits of science and technology can reach all people, and that all people can contribute to the pursuit of scientific progress. That begins with tearing down the walls that stand between people and access to scientific knowledge. When research is widely available to other researchers and to the public, it can save lives, provide policymakers with tools to make critical decisions, and drive more equitable outcomes across every sector of society. We were offered a window on the great benefits of immediate public access to research at the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the wake of the public health crisis, government, industry, publishers, and scientists voluntarily worked together to adopt an immediate public access policy, which yielded powerful results. Research and data flowed effectively, new accessible insights supercharged the rate of discovery, and the translation of science soared. The shift demonstrated how public access to research publications and data can provide near real-time returns on our investments in science and technology. That's why the White House took historic action to make the results of taxpayer-supported research publicly accessible. People across the globe will benefit from this policy on issues from climate change to medical breakthroughs and more. This is one of the bold changes we're making to build a fairer innovation ecosystem. Leadership in science and technology has driven extraordinary change, but history has shown us that new investments in science and technology rarely translate into equitable results for all communities. To address these core challenges, the White House launched a first-of-its-kind nationwide initiative to examine issues of inequity in the STEM fields. Our question was simple: what are the structural forces blocking people from participating in the STEM ecosystem? And what must we do to ensure that every person, no matter their background, can thrive in the STEM fields? We led more than a year of deep engagement with the American public. We went out and we invited people directly into that conversation. We spoke with students and teachers, workers in science and technology sectors, researchers, innovators, entrepreneurs. We spoke with education and university leaders, grassroots organizers and community scientists, business leaders, policymakers, and more. Drawing from these conversations and working with colleagues across government, we've identified structural barriers facing people in the STEM fields who have disabilities or who are immigrants, people without generational wealth, and others who began their engagement with STEM with a systematic disadvantage. And we've built a detailed vision, which we will release very soon, for what we must do to make sure that women and girls and others long underrepresented in STEM have the tools and opportunities to participate and empower the innovation ecosystem to achieve its full potential. In the United States, there has never been a coordinated national effort toward achieving equity in the science and technology ecosystem. But very soon, we will have just that, supported by action across the public, private, and nonprofit fields in an attempt to shake the very foundations of inequality in STEM and open up opportunities across sectors. This is how we will ensure that America's recent historic investments in innovation, from advanced manufacturing and semiconductors to clean energy and R&D, can open up doors to progress and economic security for all people. These are critical issues for our youth, and these are some of the topics that will be taken up next week when President Biden hosts the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in Washington. The administration is focused on ensuring youth in Africa have improved access to a broad range of skills and knowledge, with a special focus on higher education, workforce development, and building partnerships to create a sustainable, inclusive, and equitable future. As President Biden has said, we can challenge the full talents of all of our people and to a greater measure of hope and opportunity for our nation and for the world. I close by speaking to our efforts to drive equity and opportunity for all of our young people, because I've been reminded this week that our work across continents is deeply intertwined. that the values and aspirations that lead us to lift up women and girls in cities and towns across the United States also move those young learners I met in Khayelitsha and in Tableview. I hope when all is said and done, when the technology has been built, the research budgets have been issued, the policies have run their course, that all of this is done with those young people in mind. I hope that we have made progress in our work. I hope that when we've made progress in our work, that every young person will look upon the world as they do, see it not for its limits, but for its abundance. That they will not be encumbered by the weight of an unequal past, but buoyed by a boundless future. And when they dream of a life in science and innovation, that they will see the well-trodden pathways to get there before them. This is the work and the vision of the Biden-Harris administration, a vision this week has affirmed that we share with so many of you. A global STEM workforce that reflects all of us, from the classroom to the boardroom, to the operating room, to the laboratory. Communities that are engaged in the everyday work of government and see their needs addressed in our decisions. An approach to innovation that is rooted in inclusion, integrity, and our common humanity. We have before us an extraordinary window of opportunity, a moment for promise and possibility. A chance to write a new social contract, not just for this moment, but for the decades and generations that lie ahead. I thank each of you for the role that you're playing in this important work. It's been an honor to be asked to address you this morning and to be with all of you over the last several days. And I look forward to hearing from my colleagues and to our further discussion this morning. Thank you very much for your attention.
I think Dr. Nelson deserves another round of applause. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It has been really enlightening in your speech to hear about considering equity and justice as a debt to those who came before us and an obligation to those who come after us. Thank you for reminding us of the diverse people all around us, some of whom you met during your visit here in the Western Cape, who are all working hard to create the society we want. And we know that to do that, we need to work together with all those people around us as partners so that they can also contribute to the just society. It has been refreshing too to hear how the US government is working hard on embedding equity in all its policies and making sure that there is inclusion of diverse bodies of knowledge, and in this context, indigenous knowledge and community-generated knowledge. And lastly, I would say it was really good to hear you talk about the importance of making sure that tax-funded research is made accessible and available to the broader society. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a panel that's also going to share with you the work that they're doing, how different people are working on creating or ensuring that science reflects the society we want. The next panelist that I'm going to call here, I'd like to introduce, that's Professor Adebayo Olukushi, who is a distinguished professor at the Wits School of Governance at the University of Witwatersrand here in South Africa. In 2021, Professor Olukushi was appointed to the board of the Goodluck Jonathan Foundation in Nigeria. He holds a PhD in politics from the University of Leeds. He has more than 35 years of experience in areas of international relations, governance, human rights, and has worked both in the academic sector and in intergovernmental institutions. So lastly, I would mention that Professor Olukushi was a member of the African Union Assessment Panel and chair of the board of several think tanks. We look forward to hearing from you. Dr. Olukoshi, please join me at the stage here. Thank you. Let's welcome him.
Thank you very much indeed, moderator, my sister. I could almost just move a motion for the adoption of the keynote speech that we just heard and ask for permission to sit down for the discussion. Thank you very much for covering a significant amount of ground, which very much resonated with what I had myself prepared to share with this audience today. And I'll probably then adapt my 10 minutes to perhaps thinking a bit further about ways in which we can realize some of the ideals which was sketched out by the keynote speaker. And doing so with a starting point. That in terms of where we are today as humanity, although there is a lot which we can celebrate about how far we have come, I think it will be fair, and it may not be a political science bias, to say that we also live in a defining moment in the history of humanity. Across the world, societies have not been more divided and polarized than they are today. We live, as Piketty has reminded us, Thomas Piketty, in perhaps one of the most unequal times in human history, where inequality side by side with persistent and in some cases even growing poverty constitute an important scourge on human civilization. And I can cite many other examples. Even the specter of war on a global scale that confronts us, which makes it extremely difficult to have a unanimity of views about what kind of society we want. And we see this played out election after election in some of the most advanced democracies of the world, in which, again, citizens are polarized, as is political society, around competing and sometimes really outrightly contradictory visions of society, of extreme right groups which were marginal yesterday, emerging to the center stage of politics and of power, and seeking to reshape our understanding of what it means to run a democratic and open society, and sometimes doing so in the name of democracy, or of people who teach classes that in the name of academic freedom seek to roll back some of the historic gains we have made as humanity around issues of patriarchy, of race, and of broad social conscience, as defined by our keynote speaker. So it is actually a moment of, I would argue, immense introspection for us as a scientific community, to begin to think of ways in which, in addressing questions of how to build a more inclusive world, a more just world, and the role in which science can play, the role which science can play in this endeavor, that we also simultaneously address our minds to the sources of the discontents that have produced the kinds of polarization that make our task even more difficult in marshalling a societal consensus towards a new social contract, a new social bargain. And here I would like to begin by suggesting that one of the things perhaps which we need to have a much greater audacity and boldness about is the notion of science as a global social good, a global public good, in which all of us as humanity are partakers and beneficiaries, And the implication of this in terms of what it means to have intellectual property rights or to conduct trade in educational services is one which probably requires some very painful decisions at the national level, especially from those who are the biggest beneficiaries of the trade in educational services or the current structure of trade in intellectual property rights that we see around the world. And I don't need to elaborate too much on this point, because although at a later point during the COVID pandemic, we saw corrective measures that began to be taken around this question, the early stages were simply disgraceful as far as humankind was concerned, in which we had arguments, for example, that it is my country and it is my companies that funded the research that produced the vaccine, so therefore they are entitled to make the kinds of profit that they seek to make out of it, selling it to those of you who did not produce or did not invest, even if we agreed that it was a globally shared concern that we are all dealing with. And at the end of the day, in the structure of scientific production and consumption which we need to overturn, which the current system seems to perpetuate, I would argue that one of those elements that needs effectively to be rethought and redesigned is the question of how we share the benefits of science. It cannot be acceptable that a part of the world will continue to be the site of experimentation in the search for solutions. Some of the research on the COVID pandemic was carried out here in South Africa, but without the right to manufacture the vaccines, even when the solutions began to be found. We cannot accept, therefore, that polarization in which a part of the world remains a site of experimentation and another part of the world continues to draw the benefits. And here I think the point which has been made about North-South and South-South collaboration during this meeting around issues of co-construction and co-consumption, which our keynote speaker addressed, become really pertinent. Here again, I need to underscore that in terms of co-construction and co-consumption, one of the big challenges which I have experienced in my own professional life is also the unequal power relations with which we go into processes of co-constructing knowledge and disseminating that knowledge, especially in a context in which much of the funding for co-construction actually comes from, again, one region of the world, and another region is effectively playing the role of a recipient on a continuing basis. If we are going to be able to overcome some of these, and we accept that that science is a global public good, it may in fact also be necessary that we think of new funding frames that are bolder and more audacious, that allow self-constituting, globally oriented scientific communities to emerge on the basis of equity and shared interests, and not on the basis of geographically defined or politically centered relations of collaboration and exchange. Reference, of course, has also been made to the importance of multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary responses to the range of challenges which confront us, of the importance of engendering science much more, and I think we probably haven't put enough emphasis in this forum on the central importance of getting many, many more women into science at all levels, in all fields, in a way that will help us also address questions of whose question really matters and whose solutions are also important to put forward in our march towards progress. Ultimately, it seems to me that some of the answers to the question which is posed before us of justice in science will not be fully answered unless we also try to rebalance the relationship among the different fields of science. Today, in much of Africa, most governments have committed themselves, not without some justification, to the promotion of STEM, almost to the neglect of everything else. And I want to argue that whilst it is welcome to promote the STEM sciences as much as possible, it cannot be right to eradicate the teaching of history, for example, from the curriculum. It is the kind of recipe you begin to have for the production of scientists who have absolutely no historical consciousness and no sense of context. And that in itself, as we know from the history of humanity, can be extremely dangerous for our development. Ultimately, therefore, it seems to me we may not get science to work for the society we want if we do not strive to get the kinds of states and governance systems we need to frame the science policies that can meaningfully respond to people and communities, and not just to the service of markets. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Olukoshi, and very sort of messages that you're carrying with your comments there, and challenging us to work towards realizing all these ideals that were expressed in the keynote address also. You asked a very important question when you asked as to whether we have unanimity in what a just society should look like. So that's something we have to really engage with. And lastly, the message that we need to consider science as a global social public good so that all are partakers and beneficiaries, especially in this current context that we live in, where the challenges are also global. I would like to move to our next panelist, and this is Dr. Lydia Borrell-Damian, who is the Secretary General of Science Europe. This is the association that represents national public organizations that fund and perform research in Europe. She holds overall responsibility for the organization's strategic development and implementation of action plans. Her areas of experience cover a wide range of research and innovation priorities, namely the European Union Framework Program, the European Research Area, a research infrastructure, research ethics and integrity, and she covers regional innovation, gender and diversity, as well as open science, doctoral education, energy science policy, a very big portfolio. So we're looking forward to hearing from you to add to these rich conversations that are taking place here. Please come to the stage.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to be sharing panel with these distinguished speakers and so inspiring speakers. I think I have a PowerPoint presentation. May I ask? Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I represent this organization that gathers 40 organizations in Europe, research funding and research performing, with the mission to develop policies based on good practices and based on the knowledge of both the funding and performing agents in Europe. We have a strategy plan, and I have selected a couple of examples that are relevant to the question of this session. So how we work to ensure that society reflects the values of the society that we want. Well, let's start then with our values. These are our values as Science Europe, as we act collectively. And these bullet points that you see now on the screen respond to a deep discussion we held on several stages for almost 1 year in our organizations, because we wanted to get to the gist of the values of our association. They are, as you see, we believe in the common good of research mission and research as a public service. We believe of freedom of scientific inquiry and the self-organizing nature of the research systems. We believe on equality, ethics, integrity, and inclusivity. We recognize that there is a strong link between research, education, and innovation. And we believe that collaboration in the research and innovation system is utmost of importance, together with engagement in society. To realize effectively, to embed these values in our actions, we need first and foremost peace. And I would like to start with a call for peace in the world. There are many conflicts all around the world. We suffer now in Europe very much out of the consequences of the work with Ukraine, but it's affecting the whole Europe. Immigration, people who live out of their homes, families separated, the men staying in Ukraine and the women allowed to leave the country. Men are not allowed to leave the country. This is a dramatic situation. The 50% of the education and research infrastructures of Ukraine has been destroyed. Can you imagine the effort that this will require to rebuild the system? And this is if they don't get ever more destroyed. Anyway, let's continue with values. Because also in Science Europe, we wanted to engage in a deep discussion on what are the values that underpin the organization of research. We are very conscious that there are cultural differences according to the disciplines, etc. But we wanted, again, to get to a series of cross-cutting values that we believe that are of application no matter what area of research a scientist is engaged in. So the values are organized in sort of a circle, but deeply interlinked one with each other. So we have first a value of autonomy and freedom that we believe must be preserved at all, by all means, because we certainly see that this value is very threatened in several parts of the world. We have openness and collaboration, research and integrity, collegiality. I will not spend more time in each of these core values because every one of them is probably the subject of another conference, but they are really worth to be looked at and be embedded in institutional policies. And that's what we do in Science Europe. We are now continuing this work after this reflection on common values to see how these are effectively embedded in institutional policies. I have highlighted here a couple of examples that reflect the changes in research culture. One is how we can influence, in the good sense of the word, the behaviors, attitudes, values, expectations, and norms that governed research systems. The research communities are faced great difficulties. We have heard that many times in this conference. And these include precarious research careers and uncertain career paths, narrow and ineffective rewards and incentive systems, delays in achieving open science, and first and foremost, a continued lack of diversity, as other colleagues have also been mentioned. So there are discussions ongoing in our community of 40 organizations to how to change this culture, how to reconsider institutional policies, how to better promote our values. So we continue our work on research culture to see how we can promote open science. We are fully in line with the recommendation by UNESCO, and how we can better engage in the public. This that I say with a very, let's say, few words, again, it corresponds to the outcome of a process, a very in-depth process with our members. And that has taken place mostly in Europe, but also with other parts in the world, in the framework, for example, of the Global Research Council. And I hope also that you can get some inspiration out of these thoughts and get further reflection. On equality, diversity, and inclusion, we'd like to, I don't need to remind that this is a fundamental right and the foundation of peaceful and prosperous societies. Moreover, improving the equality, diversity, and inclusion in research will only lead to better science. And that is perhaps something that is often ignored. On the other hand, thinking about the equal opportunities for education and development, we strive for all types of researchers to be welcome in the system. And I will continue that with my next slide. Sorry. We, in 2017, produced guidelines for gender in science. Now, the dialogue has evolved, the paradigm is evolving, and the concept of intersectionality is being more and more present in our lives and in our analysis. So, based on this concept, stressing the need to address the ways in which research systems address inequality, not only based on gender, race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, social background, etc., becomes very important, because it's not the same to deal the discrimination that maybe a Black woman can face with respect to an Asian Japanese, for example. It's different. There is a plethora of discriminatory situations that they all need to look at it individually, yet at the same time define institutional processes where cases of discrimination can be dealt with effectively. In Science Europe, we have a task force that deals with equality, diversity, and inclusion, and we are part of conversations worldwide, like in the Global Research Forum, where one of my colleagues is co-leading the working group on gender. For example, they have conducted a study on discrimination and on sexual harassment in research. These are very important studies because these are worldwide studies and reflect, in most of the cases, the lack of data. We need to be conscious that in many instances, we are not even allowed to collect data. It's not legal. So here is my plea to develop legal frameworks that allow the collection of data for research purposes, all anonymity, of course, observed, but to be able to work with real data and not with just very broad estimates. Also, our take in this field is to revise the guidelines and not to issue a second edition of the gender guidelines, but to issue a first edition of equality, diversity, and inclusion guidelines. My last example is the reform of research assessment. There's been a very wide discussion in Europe for the last 2 years, also some previous discussions, but very structured discussions in the last 2 years about how we can take account of the evolution of the research systems in the assessment of researchers. Many researchers complain that they cannot find their place in the research system. Others complain that they can't advance enough. Others complain that the recognition is not reached when they believe they have good pieces of work recognized by others, but not maybe for some official channels. Anyway, it's not about complaining. It's about changing the research assessment systems, along the way, our social paradigms are changing, and the concept of the research and what's the mission for research in society. So we have engaged in a process that has led to an organization that was presented 1st of December this year. It's called COARA, Coalition for the Research on Advanced Assessment. This coalition is open to all institutions in the world. We started with 400 institutions, 80% from Europe, 20% from outside Europe. So this here is also my invitation for you to look at what this organization can offer in terms of reviewing your own research assessment systems. Let me finish by saying, these are the positions we've published. Let me finish by saying that Science Europe works on many other areas: investments in research and innovation, European research area, open science, science for the green transition, science policy, etc. And that we are open for collaboration with you, and also to ensure that science reflects the society we want. Having said that, I would like to say that we fully endorse the declaration for the Cape Town World Science Forum, and that I really, really welcome the African voice, and I would like to contribute to raise the voice of Africa in the world of research. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Borrell Damian, for your contributions to this discussion also, and especially for sharing with the audience examples of work that is ongoing in Europe. Well, just good to know that your work is shaped by the values that you have articulated, and that you're continuously focusing on being inclusive and recognizing issues related to intersectionality factors. I'm going to move on to introduce Professor Asma Ismail, who is currently the president of the Academy of Sciences in Malaysia and the first woman to be appointed as a science, technology, and innovation advisor to Malaysia. Dr. Asma Ismail's contributions have been recognized through many titles she goes by. So she told me that it's not necessary to read all the titles, but I'll mention the fact that they include awarded honorary doctoral degrees by University of Glasgow, Kiel University, and Kyoto University of Foreign Studies. With that, I would like to invite Dr. Asma Ismail, to come to the stage. Let's welcome her to the stage.
I have a PowerPoint. Can you put it up? Okay. Right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Colleagues, fellow panelists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you to the organizing committee for inviting me to share my thoughts. I guess I'm probably the only speaker from Southeast Asia that has been given this opportunity. And I would like also to thank Dr. Nelson for setting the stage and the scene for today's agenda. And what I would like to share with you today is how to ensure science reflects the society we want, but I want to share the Malaysian experience on this matter. Let me begin by talking about how COVID changed the world, how the world does science. Now, COVID has taught us many lessons, some good, some bad, but let me highlight some of the good learning points from the COVID experience. The pandemic has taught us that in order to remain resilient, we need science and technology to actually power our economy post-COVID-19. And during the pandemic, especially in Malaysia, science was finally placed in the forefront. And while political leaders locked their borders, we see the enhanced means of collaboration, sharing of knowledge and shared responsibility to actually develop the current COVID diagnostics and vaccines within record time. And to prevent further pandemics, we need now to ensure planetary health and provide solutions that are actually nature-based. And during the crisis, what we are seeing is that personal KPIs no longer matters. Findings were shared via online repositories and in open science platforms, even before being peer-reviewed for publication. So in times of crisis, what we are seeing, ladies and gentlemen, is that outcome or impact now becomes much more important than simply outputs with Q1, Q2 papers. And a country, we learn that if they were using whole nation approach and whole societal approach, had better chances of handling the COVID-19. So again, what we are seeing here is out with the silo and in with collaboration and sharing of responsibility and with knowledge. And what we now say as a big learning point is that science is not to serve scientists. Science is for scientists to serve the needs for humanity. And for science to be meaningful, science needs a human face. And to make that difference, we need science to be relevant and contributing to societal goals and needs and fulfillment of the SDGs. In short, we need to create impact, but create impact in a responsible manner. Now, to create impact to society and industry, the way we do research have got to change. We can no longer just perform desktop research. The research and innovation that we do need to go, ladies and gentlemen, beyond academia to now provide real solutions that are human-centric. Responsible research and innovation is the way forward, and this is done at the beginning of the research with built-in need for public engagement. It's time to listen to what is it that the target audience wants, what the community wants, and then learn and then act on what they wanted. By doing creative and critical thinking when we come back to the lab, when we do the experimental design, but make sure it is inclusive, we have open access to share the data, and the integration of ethics and integrity need to be there at the start when performing the research. There must be gender equality. Science education needs to be there when we engage with the public so that we can now connect the dots between the science, the solution that we offer, and the real-life solution that we are about to offer to them. And governance and policy need to be there so that we can ensure shared prosperity. So the way forward is now for Malaysia to perform responsible research and innovation. And basically, we need to now offer solutions with the end in mind that is human-centric, that is nature-based and values-driven via collaboration with the government, with the industry, with the society, with academia to actually co-create solutions that align the scientific and technological progress with the socially desirable and acceptable ends. In short, the solution created must be acceptable society. So when faced with unknowns and uncertainties in the future, it is values, ladies and gentlemen, that will guide you to do what is ethically right with integrity and with compassion. And only then can high-tech solutions result in high touch with demonstrable impact to society. Hence, the need for the country to actually invest in education that is balanced between knowledge and character. Character that is determined by values to shape the society of the future. And with values here, we are talking about trust, about care, about truth, about empathy, about compassion. So the $6 million question then is, what does it take for Malaysia to ensure science reflects the society that we want? First of all, we have the governance and the political will. In Malaysia's transformation plan from 1957 to today, we are going from agriculture-based industry to manufacturing industry to now innovation-led economy and humanization economy. And right now, we are somewhere in between innovation-led and humanization economy. But what is important is that to ensure Malaysia remains competitive globally, the government continues its efforts to actually mainstream science, technology, innovation as the driver of economic growth in its 5-year transformation plans. And with the advent of Industry 4.0, artificial intelligence and automation, we understand the need that new jobs will now be created, and we need to address this new knowledge, these new skills and competency framework for Malaysians. We also need to recreate the ecosystem so that it is now more agile, to perform research, development, innovation, commercialization, and the setting up of enterprises for our industries to actually move innovation and productivity. And we hope that by overcoming these challenges will enable Malaysia to now become a high-income, high-tech nation and developed country based on knowledge, skills, and competitiveness. The second thing we need to put into our education and talent development to actually nurture the talent of the future that is people-centric, that is nature-based and values-driven for the new economy. Because we are now moving to the new economy, and that means we need to now nurture administrators to become innovators, system-focused to now become people-focused or human-centric, from working on close innovation to now open innovation and collaborative research, from emphasis on qualifications to now employment based on competencies, from being specialists to actually multi-potentialite, from just performing ROI, we are now saying, please, we now need to move to purpose and impact-driven, which is a combination of ROI and return on values, or ROV. And working in silo point of view, we need to now change to the ecosystem point of view. So the balanced education is to us very important in terms of knowledge and character, because this is now with values that we talk about in the education in the terms of experiential learning. We now want the future talents to now also be doing service learning as well as community engagement, because this is what we need to be having in the future, and this is now part and parcel of the higher education blueprint for Malaysia. Next, we need to create the ecosystem, because if you just talk about innovation without having the ecosystem, it's not going to work. And to do that, we need to address the research, development, innovation, commercialization, the setting of enterprises, ecosystem that we need to have in the country, but we need to reduce the innovation chasm that we see between the users of knowledge, which is the industry and the community, and the knowledge generators, which is basically the academia and the researchers, right? So we have done this fundamental research in order to move 5 of our universities to now be in the top 200 QS ranking, and 2 of our universities are now in the top 5 impact ranking against SDG by Times Higher Education. We've played that game. But that game that we play did not create the kind of innovation that we now need to create impact to society. So something has got to change, because that also did not move indigenous knowledge to now be the competitive edge for our country in order to move our companies. And so what we then now have is we created the policy, national policy, to link for the first time STI to economy. And what we talk about economy here means not just for profit, but economy here also means for non-profit, to be for public good. So, and we find that even if you say academia, industry work together, they don't work together, because they need to now have intermediaries, or what we call public research institutions, that now create the collaborative effort. They bring the academia industry together to actually create the ecosystem with purpose that is impact-driven, and also having industry-ready talent within the area that we want to move forward. But again, if you're now bringing the two together, what are they going to work on? And this is where we now come up with the policy and part and parcel now of the governance of the country to now create 10-10 My STIE, because the research that we now do need to now create the kind of impact. And I will explain about that with the enablers that will now also be explained later. So we hope that by doing this, we can now create indigenous technologies to drive local industries. We can now address industrial needs for talent, enhance foreign direct investment, or FDI, and create new startups in STI, enhance existing STI-based enterprises in the country. We even now conduct responsible research module to train all the researchers, and now we're going forward by making sure that all researchers, before they apply for Malaysian grants, need now to undergo this kind of training. And of course, at the end of the game, to produce impactful research. With 10-10 My STIE, Science, Technology, Innovation and Economy, we have 10 technology drivers that we have done the foresight to bring us to become a high-tech nation by 2050, and we have also 10 socio-economic impact drivers. What this means is that we need our researchers and the industry and the quadruple helix to now come together at the start to actually do fundamental as well as applied and also translational research. And this is where we want to move, like for medical or healthcare or in agriculture or forestry industry, we need now to bring together convergence of knowledge, multidisciplines working together hand in hand at T0 to now be able to move the agenda for the country. And you can't have this simply by creating innovation. This is what we usually do at the university. We give it to the closest community and then see whether it works. It doesn't work that way. If you want to be able to create industries out of the innovations that we have done, there is a need for us to make sure that there's infrastructure at the place is there, infrastructure is there. Do we have the talent stock that is now able to move that industry? Integrity, where the good governance is there, physical and non-physical incentives to actually move that industry, governance bodies in terms of institutions, polytechnics, as well as universities, interaction, whether there's there with the strategic partner, with the industry, with other partners, and of course, internationalization with global best practices and standards. And that is not enough. We even map where in Malaysia these industries, when generated by the university, should now go to these kind of places because the ambience and the environment is there to be able to move that particular industry. Because the application of the 1010 MySCIE in every location will move each of the socio-economic sectors up the innovation value chain. Because it's not good enough to actually just produce innovation and talk about commercialization. The society, the community, the area has got to have the feel of that. And that means when jobs are now created and we can now create the kind of change in society, not just change, but sustainable change in society, only then can science be seen and felt to benefit the community and the industry. And the implementation mechanism. Malaysia is famous for our blueprints, but our implementation needs a lot of improvement. And I'm sure many of us share the same kind of situation as well. So with implementation, we talk about focus, we need to prioritize, we need to systematize, collaborate with the strategic partners, make sure the innovation that we produce is inclusive, and make sure we are always doing foresighting to make sure that we are in line with what is going on in the world. And ladies and gentlemen, improving culture or structure or process of the institution in isolation will not guarantee social justice. We need synergies across all elements, and that is a must. Our experience in Malaysia through the Academy of Sciences Malaysia, we find that the implementers, the one who are now actually cascading the policy, they need to understand. And it's not just about policy telling them about how. We need now to teach them how to do the how. So this now is a very important one if we really truly need to build an effective STI ecosystem. And we, therefore, in Academy, we focus in helping engage many engagements with the various ministries, with agencies, with universities, with the community. And this is where, ladies and gentlemen, we need to de-jargonize the science that we do so that we can now be able to interact and communicate well with the people. And we do that by building the 8I STI ecosystem enabler guided by the 8R nature-centric philosophy. And in times, it's not every time that the government will say, I have enough grants for you. But what happened during the times when the grants are not there? Surely projects that is working cannot falter. So what we do is having a plan B. And our plan B is to have an alternate science funding, which we call the Malaysian Science Endowment. And this is where we have money from the philanthropies, from the industry, from crowdfunding, etc. But what's more important is that we need to move industry to be able to be involved in the research. It's not just totally government funding. Right now, we have 1.2% GERD for R&D, but we are now moving in the next 5 years to 2.5% with the having industry commitment. And this is where also we now move for joint research funding and matching grants with industries and other strategic partners locally and internationally. And all the data that we have from our innovation, Malaysia has set up our own Malaysia Open Science platform. So that we believe everyone can have access to the data that has been obtained either locally or internationally. We are now collaborating with other partners as well to have a more collective, interactive open science platforms. And basically, whatever that we do, in terms of science diplomacy and continued national science policy, is very important that we build inside. Whatever that I'm talking about, it has to be successful in Malaysia first before we can deploy outside to tell our other partners how to do this. So basically, we have now collaborated and also be able to work with our strategic partners, with APEC countries, with ASEAN, and also transfer the kind of things that we have been talking about to South-South cooperation. Besides science, we need the whole government and whole societal approach for nation building today and in the future. Because let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, no one can whistle a symphony. It takes a whole orchestra to play it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ismail. So learned a lot from that, right from the beginning when you reminded us that there were lots of lessons to be learned from the pandemic, and also telling us or reminding us that science is not for scientists, but it is for the community as a whole. Those Malaysian models of using science for building a just society are really lessons that we can take from your presentation, and how to link STI to the economy, both formal and informal. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to move to our last panelist. After that, we'll engage in Q&A. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Al-Zubi, who is a development economist at the International Development Department of St. Mary's University at Halifax, Canada. Her research focuses on gender and rural development, including women's empowerment and its role in the development agenda. Since 2011, with the war in Syria, her concern and focus has also been on researching ways to improve the livelihoods and food security of affected households, especially women-headed households. Dr. Al-Zubi is a member of Science in Exile and a member of the steering committee for that. She has been working in various areas, including academia, the UN, and an NGO that oversees foundations for a period of about 15 years. Thank you. So welcome, Dr. Al-Zubi, to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. It's such an honor to be here with you today. So, and thank you for this introduction. So, as a representative of GYA, I'll start my talk with justice in science. We all know that science benefits our society for every day. Respond to all societal needs through creating new knowledge, improving education, and increasing the quality and the value for our lives. Excuse me. But we take the responsibility to make these benefits happen. In other words, responding to the needs and challenges for in-need societies is fully associated with justice and equity. As a member of Global Young Academy, I would like to take this opportunity to explain the role of GYA in ensuring how science reflects our society. Science for all, science for the future. This is the vision of Global Young Academy, to give the space for young scientists and researchers around the world without boundaries and borders, without restrictions and limitations, without bias and discrimination. To incubate those young scholars and researchers regardless their nationality, their race, ethnicity, religion, beliefs, faith, and color. To build and enhance their capacities through identifying both opportunities and challenges that early career researchers face around the globe with a view of working with or improving them to understand and improve the research environment for scientists around the world, including improvements of access to laboratory equipment and improvement of access to channels for disseminations of findings, as well as bridging the gap between low and middle, as well as high-income countries to build and create the society that we believe in, the society that all people belong to. For that, Global Young Academy has become the partner of choice for established science academies, science bodies, and networks, and other national and international stakeholders. As a representative of young scientists' voice on various science and science policy matters. Moreover, the Global Young Academy continuously publishes a number of statements, articles, and edit topical issues, contribute to statements by senior science organizations, and also develops projects that explore or address issues for global importance for society, of society. As a result, Global Young Academy members come together in interdisciplinary groups and projects to address global challenges relevant at the intersection of science and society on issues such as biodiversity, global health, climate change, science advice, and science diplomacy. As a feminist who works on forced migration and refugee issues with more focus on gender, I will brief Global Young Academy commitment to justice and dig in a couple of Global Young Academy outcomes. First, Women in Science. So, Women in Science, a group that aims to have the voice of women scientists widely heard to reach policy and decision makers with the target of a better future for female scientists. The group aims to raise broad awareness to the not fully exploited potential of the female intellectualism. Women in Science believes in a global contribution by creating a platform where challenges and possible solutions are tackled in order to build capacity of its group members, as well as of other women who would consider working groups as providing a role model for career success. As well, I wanted to dig further with you and talk about At-Risk Scholars Initiative. The need to protect and support academic researchers fleeing conflict zones around the world is urgent. These intellectuals are perceived as threatening to regimes and extremist groups and are targeted directly as a result. Their survival and that of their families often requires them to leave their home countries, which brings their research career to a startling halt. they came to hold, actually. And the countries that host them, they struggle to gain access to or acceptance within the professional networks needed to sustain their research careers. This demoralizing experience poses a serious threat to scientific discovery and undermines the rebuilding capacity of a country once the conflict or threat ends. This initiative has two main aims, actually. First, to contribute to at-risk scholars' reintegration into a scholarly work environment and support the development of research skills and connections relevant to their host countries. In addition to support exceptional early or mid-career at-risk scholars in developing countries and competitive membership applications to other organizations. And here I should tell you about mentoring and membership programs. Since 2018, 35 mutually beneficial mentoring relationships between members of the Global Young Academy Initiative and at-risk scholars have been established, leading to increased professional network connection and opportunities for at-risk scholars. Currently, 17 active mentoring relationships are ongoing, and 18 have graduated from the program as of September 2021. Through our endorsement programs, 5 at-risk scholars have been successfully selected as new Global Young Academy members over 3 selection rounds from 2019 to 2021. Started as a pilot, the endorsement program has now been made a permanent membership pathway to facilitate at-risk scholars in the Global Young Academy. Looking forward, the At-Risk Scholars Initiative aims to expand the reach of career development workshops in person and online in cooperation with partner organizations, including those that work with at-risk scholars in low and middle income countries. On the personal side, I applied to be a Global Young Academy member because I'm eager for justice for wartime scholars. For a female Syrian scholar who had to flee the war in Syria in 2016, with her husband who is from a religious minority who was targeted by extremist parties. For a mother in exile who has to keep her career and look after her child, Victor. For women who have been researching violence against refugee communities, in particular gender-based violence, while herself wasn't protected by migration law at some point. Indeed, I was looking for justice that I missed when I couldn't get residency visa because of my nationality, when I was prevented from attending my ceremony as a distinguished scientist because of bans against Syria, when my award from a prestigious American institution for the best research proposal was withdrawn because of sanctions against Syrians. I wish I have enough time to tell you what being at-risk scholar means, what suffers, and what we have been suffering, and how we're looking forward for justice. Dr. Nelson, I'm so happy that you are here, and I think you're the right person to be this matter, to hand this matter to you, to reconsider depoliticizing scholars from sanctions, civilian scholars from sanctions. Dr. Lydia, the same. I hope we work together to reconsider depoliticizing scholars from European Union sanctions as well. But hopefully that you are here, and hopefully always there's time For that, as a co-leader of Global Young Academy At-Risk Scholars Initiative, I call esteemed speakers, esteemed keynotes, the prestigious and appreciated audience to consider at-risk scholars' meanings. I call those who are interested in ensuring science and society association, those who believe in science diverse, knowledge production, those who respect humanity and look for peace building. I call decision and policy makers, authorities, governments, institutions, organizations, universities, and donors to secure those transitional knowledge sources. At wartime scholars, at-risk scholars, this human capital, and give them the opportunity to contribute and add their value to their new safe home countries. Believe me, the need is huge, and we need all of you to support those initiatives and those organizations and those scholars and incubate and help them to make the society that we all want. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Al-Zoubi. We have had such an enriching morning, listening to different contributions and all, reminders of the vulnerable communities that shouldn't be forgotten, and from which platforms their issues should be addressed as well. I'm not going to take much time because I would like to give the audience time to engage with the panelists. And I'm going to call Dr. Nelson back to the stage so that we can give comments, questions, and engage with the panelists. Thank you. There are microphones in the corridors, and with the room a little bit dark, it's hard for me to say when hands are up or so. So just go straight to the microphone and let's talk. We have some minutes to do that. I see somebody standing there ready. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And when you ask a question, if it's specific for a panelist or a panel member here, please mention who you're directing the question to. Some questions might be just general. So go ahead, sir.
Okay, good morning. My name is Martin Dominic. I'm at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. I'm also a former member of the Executive Committee of the Global Young Academy. I much appreciate that Lydia Burrell-Damian already mentioned the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment, COARA, and the GYA is very happy to be involved in this effort. Specifically, we'll need to have global equity in our mind in this context, and we need the voices from beyond Europe. So we have representatives from several organizations at the meeting who would make most valuable partners. So let us not miss out on the great opportunity to tackle the roots of several issues that we're facing, work together on this, valuing our values and building something better for our common future. Are there any views right now on how we properly acknowledge the skills of researchers who are doing great work in less favorable environments?
Thank you. Let's take another one. Yes, please go ahead.
Thanks very much. My name is Leslie Swartz. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of the South African Journal of Science and of the Scandinavian Journal of Disability Research. I was really delighted to hear Dr. Nelson make mention of disability inclusion in her talk. Thank you for that. I haven't been obviously at all of the sessions of this meeting, but it's actually the first time since I've been at this meeting that I've heard disability mentioned. I may not have been there. And I find that quite worrying, actually. According to WHO and World Bank statistics, we're talking about 15% of the global population. There are higher rates of disability in low and middle income countries than in high income countries. And we know very well that there's a circular relationship between disability and poverty and inequality. Any science practice which excludes and doesn't actually work actively to include people with disabilities as scientists, as participants in research, and as beneficiaries of research cannot make a claim to be promoting social justice. In Africa and in the world, we need to do all we can to increase disability inclusion in science within a universal design approach. I'm often told, people say, oh, it goes without saying, but if we don't mention disability, it would be similar to not mentioning race, to not mentioning gender, to not mentioning migration. We need to focus on what we need to do to create inclusion. We need to work actively for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to take two more and then I'll have the panelists respond. I'll keep on going to the right.
Hello, assalamu alaikum. Thank you for the enlightening and inspiring panel. My name is Alfadha Osman and I'm from the Sudanese National Academy of Sciences. My question is primarily directed to Dr. Nelson. I'm a Maryland native, like yourself, by the way. We were reminded a few times over the last few days of the importance of the private sector in driving innovation. It was mentioned yesterday that in the United States, a lot of the investments, or I think a majority of the investments into innovation is driven by the private sector. And you touched on the efforts by lawmakers, but I would appreciate if you could expand a little bit more on this. What can we do as scientists or as students to impact and influence the private sector, like you had mentioned, to innovate with ethical forethought? Thank you.
Thank you. Last question on the extreme there.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Kavwanga Yamba from the Zambia Academy of Sciences. And my question goes to Professor Adebayo Olukushi. First of all, I want to totally agree with you, Professor, that we cannot accept a situation where only one part of the world is doing all the scientific experimentation and producing results, while the other part simply consumes. I totally agree with that, because I think we all need to participate in the research and producing results. And I think South Africa has shown the way. They've shown that it can be done. They've taken that lead. Now the question is, don't you think it is the lack of the political will of many of our African leaders who hold the power to distribute the resources that African scientists have not been enabled to participate equally as the other part of the world? I do believe that African scientists are not the failures in this game, but it's because of the lack of political will on those who hold the power. And if this is true, how do you think we can ensure that those who hold the power to invest, to distribute the resources and invest meaningfully in STI can be done? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So may I start with you, Dr. Nelson, and then you'll be followed by Dr. Adebayo, Dr. Olukoshi, and then any other person can comment to add on that. And lastly, we'll have you.
Thank you, Dr. Moya. Thank you for these excellent comments and observations. And thank you to my fellow Marylander for the great question, which I'll get to shortly. I just wanted to say to the question about, or the comment about disability, that I just heartily agree that we are thinking very much in our work about issues of equity in STEM and issues of disability, universal design, the fact that scientists and technologists are often neurodiverse, the fact that if we really want to have voices and perspectives from many different communities, it means making creating institutions in which people can enter and thrive. And I think a perspective that makes it incumbent upon the person to have to go into a terrain that can often be difficult for accessibility issues, discrimination issues, and the others, that places that onus on the individual is not the society that we want to live in, and not the kind of, I think, STEM ecosystem that we want to live in. So thank you for that comment. I very much appreciated that. To your question about how to think about the business piece, I think one of the things I've been inspired by in my work in the Biden administration has been I kind of sense that sectors should lean into the things that they uniquely do best. And so, it is the case that basic science, foundational science is what a lot of scientific researchers and research scientists do best. Industry certainly does research with different incentive structures. And so I think that one of the ways to think about the role of innovation and the role of business in innovation is to think about what they can do. So I think we know that, to your question about how to put ethical foresight at the beginning, we know that in first stage venture capital, let's say, one way that that venture can work to give shape to businesses is to think about those questions. How are we going to ethically use data as we invest and scale this business, for example? It's also the case that there are things that government can uniquely do, I think, in the innovation space. And I'm thinking here of a new institution called ARPA-H, which we've just stood up in the United States, which is Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health. And what that agency is supposed to do is what business can't do. So these are things that we want to scale and that we want to commercialize, but that aren't really going to create markets necessarily. There's not going to be a profit motive or a profit to be made, but there's a lot of social benefit to be made, and with regards to healthcare and public health outcomes and the like. So that's what I'd offer as a start of that conversation. But that's one of the kind of central questions and issues that we face. So thank you for raising it.
Thank you. Anybody who wants to add to that strand of discussion? Yes.
Maybe, yes, thank you. Maybe on the business engagement, I fully agree. However, I have studied university business collaborations, and I realized that here we talk very general on the private sector, and the private sector is huge, and you have for-profit and non-for-profit, and I think it requires a lot of sensitivities to the different objectives, time scales that are in research institutions and in companies, but also the expectations that companies may have on the research is very, those companies that have research as part of their strategic development are normally very good to deal with universities, to deal with research centers, because they do understand how this is intrinsic for their development. However, companies that do not rely so much on the research outputs are less interested in research. However, they know that in universities is where they get most of the workforce. So then they are interested in education. So it's more about understanding who can be your best partner for what. It depends on how you want to interact with the companies.
Okay, thank you. In the interest of time, you want to comment on that?
I think the Malaysian concept is about having the industry and the academia work together at T0. And we have the intermediaries that will bring them together. And these intermediaries are providing funds to make sure certain kind of industry will take off in the country. Because if you have only one flagship, that doesn't mean anything. We need to create more flagships so that the industry, like the electronics for Malaysia, can now fly. So this is very important that sometimes the academia, they are in the fundamental, they would think that the industry doesn't want the kind of research they're doing, but when we bring them together, we realize that the academia does what it does best, which is fundamental research, and industry have the technology, but the combination is a wow, because then we can now co-create solutions that can now make Malaysia's industry more competitive.
Thank you very much. Dr. Olukosun?
Well, thank you very much to the colleague from Zambia who raised the issue of responsibility, share of which must be taken by governments and leaders in Africa. And I agree, there's clearly much more that leadership in Africa can do to promote science and to invest in research and development. And all of the indicators which we have clearly show that the continent is lagging way behind the global average in all of these domains. As you indicated, there are initiatives that have been taken by a few of the countries on the continent. You cited South Africa, which has a properly established funding framework for science and research. I worked in an African Social Science Council that tried to do the same thing on a continental scale for the social sciences. And there are a few other countries, Rwanda, Nigeria, that have launched initiatives. Well, in many respects, these in relation to the need and to the challenge which we are faced with would represent a drop in the ocean. Over and above that, however, there are also structural obstacles to the kinds of ambitions and ideals which we build around notions of co-creation, which we need to overcome. And those were the points I was really trying to underscore, that whilst we have come some way as a community of scholars in recognizing that there are asymmetries in the production of knowledge, and have tried to address this through notions like co-creation. If we do not go into the co-creation process with some degree of equality that we come to the table with, then ultimately the person who defines the questions we focus on or the methods we use will be the more powerful in that equation. And that speaks to even questions like open access, which is laudable, because it makes it possible for me to sit in Dakar, have access, for example, through JSTOR to journals produced around the world. But that also runs the risk of producing a new form of domination if I do not have the capacity to produce at home as well. And I like the Malaysian point in this regard. You have to have the investment in a local knowledge production capacity so that in the rendezvous of ideas, you are able to bring perspectives from your geography, your history, your moralities and ethics into the conversation, out of which we can then truly to create a global science that is truly reflective of all of us, rather than a skewed science, which effectively becomes a transmission belt for all kinds of new forms of domination.
Okay, thank you. The other comment related to Dr. Alzobi's presentation, but it was more of a comment. I don't know if you want to
I'm so happy to hear all these suggestions, all of these comments, and I'm so happy to be here with my esteemed panelists, and I just wanted to build up on what they have mentioned, to build up on the call for peace, to build up on the call to end conflicts. And actually I teach forced migration and Middle East politics, and I feel shame that the situation is deteriorating by the time, and the statistics of refugees get increased by time. And what about how science can serve those people? Let's focus, please, let's focus on refugee communities, on the education of refugees, on many generations? What about the future for generations that, for people that they can't spell even their name? I met people 15 and 16 years old, they can't spell their name. They didn't attend any education scheme since they left their home. I'm not talking about Syrian only, I'm talking about the situation it's drawn on all refugee communities over all the world, which there are more than 85 million, and more than 53% of those refugees are children and women who are suffering violence, and even children who are suffering the lack of education. In Syria, more than 3 million children don't attend any education scheme. Only 400% in refugee communities who attend schools. So just to think about how science can reserve those communities, how to make science, how they can get the access to science, to education, then we can build this community, the community we want, the community that we belong to, the community that's equity, justice is there. Then we can talk about how science reflects on our society.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to take the last round of questions. There are 3 people. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Lillian Hunt. I'm from the Wellcome Trust in London, UK. Firstly, I hope all women and people from gender minorities feel empowered to ask questions in this forum, so I'm very grateful for the opportunity to ask myself. I think an important note from all the speakers there is actually this concept of science for social justice, but social justice for who? And I'm very pleased that you've all touched on that in different ways, and I appreciate all your comments. My question particularly is also actually directed at Dr. Nelson, but I'm sure it resonates with most of you, which is when we're doing this work on improving equity in science research and in accessing the benefits of it, we need to really think about the active exclusion on multiple axes of marginalization. And I just wonder sort of how does your work include an intersectional methodology in changing those benefits so that they are actually accessible to everyone? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll take the next person behind you before I move to the side. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Ioan Jelev. I am the Vice President of the Academy of Agriculture and Forestry Sciences from Romania. And my question is for Ms. Damian. What is her opinion concerning the creation of the common research area in Europe between the Western, Eastern countries, especially we take into account some differences, especially in the agricultural research, where these researches are strongly influenced by the climatic condition, hydrological conditions, soil different conditions. Then how she see the development of common research area in Europe? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll take the last 2 from here, and we'll conclude with responding to them as briefly as we can because of time. So let's hear the last 2.
Yes, thank you. My name is Nati Matondo from Mangosuthu University of Technology here in South Africa, Durban, KwaZulu-Natal province. My question regards to the question of equity, right? So, which I think is necessary, but there is always a tension between equity and efficiency. So in other words, it's a question of numbers, more people benefiting, but how do we ensure that this benefit is efficient? In other words, there is quality in this benefit, So it's like a jigsaw puzzle. The more you push for equity, the more efficiency suffers, and the more you push for efficiency, equity suffers. So it's a question that I've been grappling with myself. But how do we balance the two? We need both, especially in the context like South Africa. We can't go for equity alone and leave efficiency, and we can't go for efficiency and leave out equity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll take the last question.
My name is Max Paoli. I work for the World Academy of Sciences, TUAS. I thank the panelists for their inspiring presentations. And a question earlier on raised the issue of disabilities that were not discussed as much as perhaps it was wished. And I would like to raise another aspect that wasn't perhaps discussed as much as I wish, which is the environmental one. I mean, I feel that there cannot be social justice with destruction of the environment and exploitation of nature and the depletion of limited resources. This connects actually to SDG number 12, which talks about responsible consumption. And so if actually we are irresponsible, which is what is still happening, how can that bring social justice? In terms of, for example, also climate action, for climate justice, even in the US, we've seen displacement of people, you know, from Florida or Alaska to other locations. And then we see an issue of social justice because those who are wealthier can relocate more easily than those who are underprivileged. And even UNESCO over the past years has very much emphasized the concept of reconnecting with nature. And only from Malaysia, I heard today mentioned very briefly the nature-based solutions. So what is your perspective, and how do you think we can increase the emphasis on nature to have less anthropocentric views, which we've seen they do not work? You also mentioned COVID. COVID showed us the concept of one health. One health brings together planetary health with human and animal health, yet we still seem to be so centered on us and not have a holistic view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to start again with Dr. Nelson and asking the panelists to sort of answer in a minute or so. I know the questions are bigger, but part of it is information sharing rather than a question that needs direct answer. So I'll start with you and then move with the others, which will be your concluding comments as you comment on the questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mojo. So let me just say thank you all for being here, and what an honor it's been to be with these panelists. As I know we're wrapping up and I only have a minute, so I wanted to be sure to give tribute to my co-panelists here. On the issue of how to think about the intersections of social locations and what that means for science and technology policymaking, you know, one example I might offer briefly is you know, part of this sort of equity mandate that the Biden-Harris administration began with established a body called the Equitable Data Working Group that I co-chaired. And part of the work of that group was, and this goes to the answer to the question the gentleman raised as well, is that, you know, equity is a kind of baseline question. It's a question asking us to say what do we know about what we're doing and how can we have sort of better outcomes. And that means often, and I think Lydia raised this as well, you know, that we actually need the data to be able to ask those questions. And part of what we're doing, certainly in the Biden-Harris administration, is thinking about how do we create the data sets, sometimes through interoperable, privacy-preserved data, to be able to ask those questions. So how many scientists living in rural communities are facing disability barriers in the work that they do? And that requires us to think about data collection in ways that nation states have never done previously. Sometimes even posing the questions, as Lydia suggests, is not permitted by law. And so I think data is one question, and how we increasingly leverage and privacy preserving but smarter ways data help us to get at these intersecting equity issues. To the gentleman about the tension between equity and efficiency, I would just say that, you know, what we say in our work, and certainly in the team that I lead in the White House, is that we can drive innovation for equity. And so I don't think that we have to accept that equity always means inefficiency. I truly actually believe in innovation. I mean, I spent, you know, some of my time here talking to young people who asked the most extraordinary questions, who had ideas I had never thought about the world. And, you know, it is in that kind of imagination and that kind of ingenuity and innovation is this extraordinary source of social transformation. And so although I understand there's certainly trade-offs when you're thinking about scaling and markets and these sorts of things, but I think fundamentally at a slightly higher level that it is the case that we can use that innovative energy to think from the beginning upstream about the worlds that we want to live in and about how we can use S&T and innovation to create not a kind of context that says we have to choose efficiency or equity, but creates a new context, a parallel kind of a reimagination of how we think about those things.
Thank you very much. So I'll move immediately to Dr. Borrell Damian on the question about Europe.
Thank you.
By the Romanian guy.
Yeah, let me start first with the question of the previous round, which was not answered. The colleague who asked about the Coalition for Research Assessment and the skills. If I understood your question, yes, indeed, in this grouping, in this organization that we are creating, we want to address the myriad of research profiles that are needed in research and the research careers, because we recognized that there are certain patterns favoring just a certain path, a certain career path, which is the professorship, traditional professorship, while research today requires a much more diverse variety of profiles with data stewards, with software developers that are all doing work that is very relevant to research and researching on these issues as well. So we are going to look at this diversity, not only in terms of skills, but also in terms of professional development. Fully recognize the question on disabilities when addressing equality, diversity, and inclusion, and that will be taken up as well by Science Europe. On the question on Europe, I'm sorry I cannot answer for the agricultural sector because that is a sector that is not familiar with my background, but I certainly can address your question with the broader problems we have in Europe on brain drain, from especially between Eastern and Western Europe, where despite of all the efforts of many years, there is a clear brain drain, and we want to move much more to what we call the brain circulation. That is of utmost importance and is very well in our agenda. And last but not least, on this gentleman that asked about the environmental challenges, yes, fully recognized as well your question. The nature-based solutions also alluded here in this session, but also there are many other challenges like the digital access, the interactions between the green and digital. There are many more aspects that are needed to be addressed, but the environmental challenge needs to be put at the center of research, fully acknowledging your comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for the other panelists to give your wrapping up statements, we'll start at the end and come back. Yeah. Dr. Olukrish.
Okay, thank you very much. I also wanted to reflect on the equity, efficiency, opposition, which the colleague raised in his question. And I don't think it has to be a case of incompatibility. If I would give a shorthand answer, I would say that in any context where you find a lot of emphasis on efficiency, you should look at the history of that context closely, lest the notion itself become either an instrument for or a justification that is deployed to write away patterns of exclusion that may have been established in the system. And you've had that debate here in South Africa. You've had it in other parts of the continent, where bodies of knowledge or of actors in the knowledge sector are simply marginalized on grounds either of quality or efficiency, with the issue of who defines quality and who defines efficiency not being tackled frontally. So I don't think that there's fundamentally an incompatibility. And if you push me to make a choice, I would say that my starting point will be equity, which will ultimately produce the efficiency that we need for all of us.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Ismail?
Yeah, I'd like to, first of all, thank you very much for the questions that have been asked. And I'd like to address on the climate change and environmental degradation. You know, in terms of Malaysia, we have problems with climate change and climate crisis, to the point that with the floods, the landslides and whatever that we have, at the end of the day, we're spending about 3% of our GDP just to be able to provide subsidies, to be able to provide help after all these floods. Enough is enough. So that's why we are now saying that the country, if one ministry have a policy to say, okay, when you do research, it has got to be nature-based, taking care of planetary health. But, you know, science and the environmental degradation cuts across all ministries. So this is the first time in Malaysia that we decided at the National Science Council that it has the Planetary Health Action Plan has got to be a whole nation approach, a whole societal approach. It cannot be done now in silo. So that is why in terms of grants, in terms of how we do things, now we have to take care about the environment. So we are starting on this and let's pray that it works well for the country. So we hope to make that change.
Okay, thank you. And the final word.
Yeah, I'll go briefly through the question about efficiency and sorry, making balance between quantity and the quality and the quantity. Actually, here I think the passcode is and the password is governance and good coordination between all relative bodies, between governments, authorities, policy and decision makers, between universities, institutions, organizations, all donors. This collaboration is very important just to reach our aim in this and approaching good quality for huge quantity. And in terms of climate change, I just wanted to stand with Dr. Max about this very important issue and the role of women in climate change, and especially that we women consider the pillar of agricultural sector, and they have a major role in this climate change, and I would appreciate if all bodies consider this issue, how to involve and to engender women in climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. From what we have heard throughout this morning, it is clear that a lot has been done, but at the same time, there's still a lot more that needs to be done from the contributions we have had. So it is our duty to continue to work towards building a just society through the work that we do. And with that, I want to thank everybody, the audience, as well as the panelists. Let's clap to that for ourselves and for everybody else. Thank you. That brings us to the end of this session. And apologies that we went over time a little bit, cutting into a break before the next session. Thank you.